So good afternoon and welcome to Donald Stoltenberg's Building His World. I'm Ben Jones, I'm the Director of Art, and we've been building up to this exhibition for years, beginning with a large request of artwork from Donald and his domestic partner Kenneth Swallow to the museum's permanent collection before Don's death in 2016. It was this body of over 20 major works that got our exhibitions committee excited about the potential of a major retrospective. Deborah Forman, who serves on this committee, was the greatest advocate, and we slated the exhibition for 2020 with Deborah Forman to be the guest curator. With COVID, all scheduling was rearranged, but we finally got back on track, and here it finally is. In preparation, I reached out to Donald's close friends, David Zenny and Roger Dunn, to let them know about the upcoming exhibition. And they were delighted, and I was delighted to have their complete support. We all shared in our admiration of Donald's artwork and collaborated closely together with Debbie Forman to make sure the exhibition would showcase Donald as he should be represented. Roger Dunn and his partner Howard's staff then made a remarkable donation. They donated to the museum their entire collection of Don's work, an additional 25 major works, paintings, watercolors, and photographs. Almost all the works you see in this exhibition are owned by the museum. David Zenny contributed also by lending 2 ship-themed artworks to the exhibition, including QE2 behind me in the Ocean Edge Gallery. The exhibition An exhibition this significant deserved to be documented with a catalog, but that was not on the budget, and again his friends came forward. Roger Dunn and his partner Howard Staff offered to fund the catalog, which I might say will be available after this talk in our gift shop for sale. Deborah wrote the essay, and here's the catalog. Deborah Forman wrote the essay while Roger Dunn and David Zenny offered personal recollections that are also included in the catalog. A videographer from Prague, Pavel Farkas, who befriended Don during one of many international travels, had valuable footage that he captured right here in Brewster at Don's Stony Brook Road studio of Don's process of creating a watercolor. And we have that on view in our Ocean Edge Gallery when you get a chance to see. It's 15 minutes long, and it really it shows the deep connection Don developed with this medium while giving us a glimpse of a generous, intelligent, and kind man. So it was no wonder that his friends all felt compelled to come forward and help tell this incredible story with whatever means they had available. I want to thank West Branch Capital, who recognized the importance of the exhibition and came forward to be a sponsor. I would also I'd like to now hand things over to Debbie Forman, guest curator and essayist for the exhibition, to give us an in-depth look at what is on display before us. Deborah Forman is the author of 4 books that focus on Cape Cod artists, and she is the co-author of our museum's permanent collection book, Art from Cape Cod. She was the featured editors of the Cape Cod Times and the chief editor-in-chief of the Cape Cod View. She has a degree in journalism from Temple University in Philadelphia, and she has taught courses in art history across the region, including right here at the Cape Cod Museum of Art. Deborah, who shows her own artwork at the Miller White Fine Arts Gallery in South Dennis, studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts and at the Philadelphia Museum School of Art. So welcome Deborah Forman, and congratulations on this well-built exhibition.
Thank you. And now, I'm not good with, is this good?
It's great.
Okay, I'm not good with microphones, but everybody can hear me? Okay. So, I think I'm going to start with the fact that I met Donald Stoltenberg. And it was on the occasion I had started a series of 3 books on contemporary Cape Cod artists. And the first one was Images of Land and Sea. So, my expectation, and the artists that I included, there were about 50 artists in the book, mostly it was because we live in this beautiful place. They were painting or photographing beaches and dunes and cranberry bogs and all of the beauty and how they saw the miracle of nature. When I came across Donald, he was also doing objects on land and sea, but it wasn't nature. So and when you look around here, what he saw were the wonders of man-made structures. That was what enchanted him, and that's what he focused on for the most part. You will see some, the two Provincetown pictures that are, more serene and a little different, because you'll see a different range of his work. But for the most part, he was enamored with whether it was railroad stations or bridges or ships or all kinds of things in a cityscape. He traveled a lot. He traveled frequently to Europe, and there are cases here. The one in the back there is a case of his notebooks, and you will see how he did these little paintings or drawings in these notebooks, and then he took them back to his studio and he made larger pieces. So his focus was on, oddly enough, on more like an urban kind of view. And he was influenced, he told me he was influenced, his first influence was Cézanne. And after that, he said, he was very influenced by the Bauhaus, and I want to talk about that. The new Bauhaus. He studied at the Institute of Design in Chicago, and that was the new Bauhaus, which brought over Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, who was part of the German Bauhaus school. So that in 1919, the Bauhaus School opened in Germany, and people like Kandinsky, Paul Klee, Lionel Feininger, all and a group of others were taught there. It ran until 1933, when Hitler came to power and it was closed. So Nagy brought over the whole concept of the Bauhaus program, which was a modernist approach. And it was kind of interesting. They were influenced, obviously, by modernism when we think of Kandinsky and Paul Klee. So abstract art was the influence. But what the concept of the Bauhaus was to integrate fine art with crafts and go beyond. So the whole idea was that it would expand into architecture and textiles and furniture. And that was the influence of the Bauhaus School. And Donald studied at the Institute of Design in Chicago, which they called the New Bauhaus. But I want to back up a little bit and talk to you a little bit about Donald and his life. And then we're going to get into his art and why he did what he did. So he was born, oddly, I mean, because he lived here, but he was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1927. His mother, unfortunately, died in childbirth. And based on what I have been told by a couple of his close friends, this kind of affected him. Donald felt very sad about that. 3 years after his mother died, his father, who was an accountant, remarried, and Donald wrote in one of his journals that as soon as he met the new mother or the stepmother, he liked her right away. And so she raised him. And he grew up during the Depression, and he talked about, there was not a lot of, his father was an accountant, but there wasn't a lot of money. They moved from Milwaukee to Chicago, where his grandmother was not well, and that's where basically he grew up. He also spent summers in Wisconsin at his maternal grandfather's farm. And near the farm were these shipyards where they were building boats. And later on, they were actually building big boats for during World War II. So when he was quite a young boy, he experienced these ships and the boats, and not only that, but the actual engineering of the boats. So his interest in boats goes way back to his childhood, which is significant when you look in that room, and he's done dozens of boats, but that goes back to his childhood. He in Chicago as a boy in elementary school, he was recommended for a program at the Chicago Institute of Art, a children's program, because he obviously was showing talent. And then afterwards, he did some copying at the Chicago Institute of Art. And he was very, he started building models. So you could see, as we look at his childhood, he was very interested in building structures. He built ship models when he was in Wisconsin with his grandfather. So all of this is kind of building up to what he has produced. At the Institute of Design, he incorporated a lot of the Bauhaus. And as I said, the Bauhaus was a movement, it was modernist. It was, they're very interested, if we know Kandinsky's work, very abstract, geometric. And that's certainly what even during his brief abstract period, you could see as we walk through, when we set up the show, we really wanted to show the flow. He told me that Cézanne was his first influence. Also, he was influenced by Charles Sheeler and Charles Demuth, who were precisionists in the 20s and 30s, and if you're familiar with their work, they did, again, a lot of structures. They did factory buildings, they did skyscrapers. So that was also what he was absorbing and coming to the idea of what he wanted to do. He graduated in 1953 from the Institute of Design, and he went to Europe. He loved transatlantic trips, and one of his friends told me sometimes it was really just the voyage that he wanted. But of course, as you can see in his notebooks, he was always working, always sketching, always, it seems like he never stopped. He came back after 4 months, and he settled in Boston because he got a job doing package designs for the Container Corporation of America, and we have a case there that gives you some idea of his package designs. And he did that for quite a while. But at a certain point, around 1960, he was making enough that he could live, and he gave up his commercial art to devote full time to his fine art. He lived for a period of time. Before he bought the house, he lived in Brewster for more than around 50 years. He bought the house I think in the late 50s, but it was needed a lot of work, and I think he, as Ben mentioned, he and his domestic partner, Ken Swallow, moved in the late 60s. And if you in the video in the other room, you can see he's working on a watercolor, and that's where I interviewed him in his studio, which was adjacent to his house. It was a very large studio. He had you know, he did all his prints. He's written 2 books, one on calligraphy, and we will talk about that, and one called Building the Environment, which I don't know if they're even still available. They may be out of print. I happen to have, he gave me both of those books. And we'll talk a lot about the collograph as we move on. So, he died in 2016, only 5 or 6 months after his partner died. And he kind of, I guess it was a very loving relationship. I met both of them when I interviewed Don, and we went back and forth. I actually lived, I lived in Brewster, and I lived, I don't know, almost walking distance. I could walk to his house. So I got to know him a little bit, and I got to know him a lot better doing whatever research I did and spending time talking to 2 of his very close friends, Roger Dunn, who's wrote an essay in the catalog, and David Zini. And they knew him for many, many years. David Zini was the executor of the estate, and Roger very graciously gave the museum 25. Many of them are in this exhibition. In the 50s, if we want to go over, look over there to the beginning, I think of the beginning of the show. In the 50s, he was working abstractly. It was during the reign of the abstract expressionist movement, so it kind of made sense. And it was embodying a lot of what he had picked up at school and through the Bauhaus movement. So it made a lot of sense for him to do this, you know, basically abstract expressionist work. And we can see how, as we walk through that and look at those works, you can see how he moved to, say, these bridges. So, for example, at a certain point, he really felt like he missed the object, and he gave up pure abstraction. But his work, in many ways, still retains that abstract element. His perspectives were always unusual. For example, that's the underside of an elevated train. And, you know, who would ever think to do that? Except he was interested in the structure. And if you probably didn't know the title, I think it's called, is it?
It's the
Third Avenue L.
Third Avenue L.
Yes. So if you didn't see that title, you might think it was an abstract painting. I don't know how many people would see that, but it hardly looks like the underside of an elevated train. But that was the way Don wanted to express himself. And you could see how he moved from pure abstraction and then came on, and these bridges were, you know, he didn't do them straight on. He looked for angles. He was very interested in diagonals. And if you look at these, I always, when I teach class, there's 3 lines that we think of that have an expressive aspect beside color. So there's the horizontal line, you know, the landscape, which is usually quiet and peaceful. There's a vertical line, straight vertical, which has some energy. And then there's the diagonal line, which moves. And when you look at his work, a lot of them, you could see some movement in them. And the way, he said to me, we talked about light, and of course living on the Cape, everybody is fascinated with light. And he said he likes the way light comes through an arch or a girder or something through the bridge. And if you see that triangle or white. I hate to point, but I can walk over, actually. If you see this here, how he loved to do this faceting, which is part of what the Cubists did. And this is an acrylic and oil on canvas. And then this is a colograph. So most people don't know what a colograph is. So if you think about collage, and people put a paper or board and they start cutting and pasting paper, fabric, anything, and they create an image with various pieces of paper, various objects. Well, if you look at a colograph, this particular colograph, Old Colony Railroad Bridge, you really, I work in collage, but I couldn't imagine how he would do this, except one of his technique, and as I said, he wrote a book on it. His technique was to use glue or gesso or acrylic molding liquid that hardened, and then he would carve into it or cut into it. So you get all these, and then he inked it and printed it. So this is a color proof, but he would have done an edition of this. And he would have inked it a number of times. There could have been a dozen versions. But this is very different as a colograph, and when we look, I'll show you the Provincetown ones. This is very different because you can see he also used metal tape and often worked on masonite, and he glued it down, and he carved into it. If it was like a molding, a paste, he would, once it hardened, he could carve into it and create these tiny little circles and cuts. So this is a print. I mean, he could have done 50, I doubt 100, but he could have done 50 or so. This is also a colograph. Again, you see the intricate detail and the fact that he was so influenced by, you talked about Cézanne, and he was so influenced by the abstraction and the geometry. And when we think about the various geometric elements in a painting, or a print, or a watercolor. And again, the details here are so interesting, how he's cut in. I actually have done collagraphs, but I had never used the technique that he used, and he wrote about it in this book. And then we get to Longfellow Bridge, also a colograph. But compare the two. This is so atmospheric. He also would use silk, netting, metal tape, all kinds of things. He sometimes would use newspaper or other kinds of paper. But if you compare this, so there's a range in Don, and I call him Don because his friend said that's what he wanted to, and I got a new one, so I figured I'd call him Don. There's a range here because you see the detail, and all of when we look at this is steel railroad bridge. And again, look at the view. Would we know that was a bridge if we didn't read it? I mean, there's an abstract quality to that. And it moves. Again, look at all these diagonals. Something about Donald, and Benton mentioned it, and what I felt for a long time, which is why I really wanted to do this show, was that he was so good and so talented, and yet he never really kind of reached a certain level in terms of the contributions that he made to art. And I was told, and when I met him, I saw him as kind of a modest man, kind of quiet, very gentle. But his two friends were telling me he didn't want to market himself. That wasn't what he was interested in. He just wanted to work in his studio. He just wanted to do art. And so, although he had galleries in Boston that showed his work, the MFA bought a painting of his in the 50s, an abstraction. And he had shows in this case, you will see, I wanted to arrange some brochures from where he showed at various places, and he showed in Portland, and he showed at the Corcoran in DC with marine artists. So there was a whole range of places he showed, but because he didn't have an art dealer who would promote his work, he never got beyond a certain level. And I think he's been seriously underappreciated. And I don't know if, you know, this show is so local, but I just felt it was so important that we do something for Donald, because I think he's such a wonderful artist and should be recognized for his contributions. He did carry on Charles Sheeler and Charles Demuth and Lionel Feininger. Actually, both Sheeler and Demuth were in Provincetown, part of the art colony, in the early days, in the teens, in the very beginning of the art colony. They were both there, which is kind of interesting, but Donald wasn't there. Donald wasn't born yet, so. But he was influenced by it. So then, when we go to these, and the Longfellow Bridge kind of takes you into these two paintings of Provincetown. Again, very gentle. But someone made a note, you know, he doesn't do a straight line for her horizon. He angles it. And he angles the houses. So again, that diagonal is always has a role in what he's doing. And in both cases, the monument is visible. And again, this kind of atmospheric, if you get close to this, you could see that he probably had silk or something, some textured fabric, to give this kind of textured sky. And if you come closer, he did these two straight, again, a diagonal. And of course, this is an oil painting, house in Harwich. And again, he talked about bringing these facets of light through spaces in, and how he structured everything. And when we think about it, the geometry of it, it's really all about geometry. And it is, some artists said to me, well, it's not abstract, it's abstracted. I think of someone, we were listening to some video or some interview that he did, and the interviewer wanted him to say he was a romantic. Well, I would not think of Don. I mean, there is a kind of nostalgia or warmth to a lot of his work, but it isn't romantic, and I always felt like it was what I would call expressionistic realism. Another thing that he was influenced by, which goes back to Cézanne and Picasso and also Sheeler and Demuth, was the idea that when you're painting, as opposed to a sculpture, you are working on a two-dimensional surface. And the idea was not to create a sense of space or volume or depth. Like you see some painters, and they'll do a street scene, and they'll do, you'll see houses on either side, and then you see the one-point perspective, which creates a sense of depth. The modern artists, beginning with Cézanne and continuing to Picasso and Braque, really wanted to maintain the integrity of the two-dimensional surface, not violate it. It's two dimensions. So the work is flat for the most part. You don't get a sense of it going back. It's flat. It's keeping with, maybe these, the Provincetown ones, you do this sense of space there. But most of his work was really right in front of you. He was keeping to the integrity of two dimensions. Above, which is, I think, the biggest painting in the show, and 72 inches, and I was here when we were installing the show, and Ben, they had these two ladders, and the two people were up there trying to hang that very big, large painting. That's the Colosseum, his version of the Roman Colosseum. Again, when we look at it, there is a sense. I mean, certainly would anyone know it was the Roman Colosseum? Is it important? Because he wasn't trying to, the other thing about modernism, art should be not picturing something else, not just, it was about it being in and of itself. It's not a picture, even a still life that you might make. It's not a picture of that still life. You have to look at it that it's its own thing. And so that's what Donald was, I'm sure, thinking. There's a lot of texture in this work, and as once you can get close to, you will see. So, we put all of his ships and boats here, and I hope if you haven't had a chance to go around the globe, there is a couple of very abstracted ones. That's the QE2, and he loved to sail across the ocean on those big boats. But there are a couple here that are very, you can go in there, they're very abstracted. He did a lot of collagraphs of sailboats, sweeping sails that are really quite nice. So if you haven't seen it before, you can peek in there. So we did this wall of his Cape Cod subjects, and some of them are really pretty traditional, Nazca-like. And then others, here, the angle he got of this, the boat here. Again, look at how he did it. He got all of this stuff underneath. And look how he's looking up at it. And look how he played with all of these kind of geometric elements. And again, here's another house. Smaller one, but again, you can see the connection between the bigger one and the smaller one, whereas this one is, these are watercolors. They're much more traditional in terms of kind of how he worked. Again, this picture is the Sissuit Harbor, and it's a watercolor, and it's so, it really sparkles. You really get a sense of water. And I hope you can also get, beside the abstract, I hope also, once you look at them, there's a mood that I think he expresses in some of the work. This one is very abstract. It's like a spire under scaffolding. So it looks like a church spire. And there's a lot, if you come closer, there's a lot of texture on here, how he played it. This is a wonderful painting, essentially abstract. Again, very clearly dealing with the geometric aspects of what he did. He loved the oval, which is kind of interesting. And you see it in this one. And this is a colograph again. And you will see the detail that he was able to achieve, which almost you could do as an etching, but he did it as a colograph, creating this plate with materials and not carving in, or not intaglio, or not a lithograph. He was again, this whole wall we wanted to say were cityscapes, because they all are aspects of life in the city. Again, this is a holograph. Lots of detail there. I always, when I go to a museum or a gallery, I pick out one or two of my favorite paintings, like in a museum, if I could buy a painting or something, or if I could have this painting. So I have two of my favorite. And what I like to do is, with my classes, and this is a little larger than, but I really want people to ask questions, and maybe I'll wait until the end, and then we can talk about, your impressions of the paintings, because I'm really interested in how you see them. So we'll kind of continue. And I'm going to tell you my two favorite paintings. And I'll tell you now, and then you can tell me yours, okay? This is one of them, and of course we put it on the cover of the catalog. And I guess Ben and I agreed about that, didn't we? It is also atmospheric, it's very moody. He loved, Donald loved to travel. And so we have these train stations. There's another one over there. But again, the oval here. And then very specifically, this is all kind of soft and atmospheric, and then you've got this really tight picture of the engine of the train. And again, when we look close, he did a lot of thick paint in here. So there's so much going on here. That's one of my favorites. I also love this one. Again, there's an oval. And this is Cleveland Arcade. It's a watercolor. Of course, you can get a little softer image with the watercolor. The other thing is, when we hung this show, one of the things that he and I were talking about was his color, because I'm very interested in color. And I said to him, well, what about color? Because a lot of his work is not real strong colors. So I asked him, and he said, well, blue was his favorite color. And when we hung the show, and I looked around, look at all this blue. I understood what he meant, but I didn't realize it, even here. So this is Boston Public Library lamps. Again, very soft, it's watery, it's very kind of loose. So he would come in very tight on some things, and then kind of loosen up. So it wasn't just one approach to his art. This is Boston, Washington Street, if anyone is familiar with it. We got this lettering in. What was the date of this? 2007. So it's relatively modern. This is my other favorite painting. It's Old Sullivan Square Station. Again, the oval, the arch. Again, the diagonals. The softness, the train. And when you got to know who Donald was, and I, as I say, didn't know a lot about him until I spoke with his two close friends, but he was, he loved to travel. And in this case here, the Brewster Ladies Library had a bequest from the estate of all of his notebooks and journals. And I went through, I think there were 7,000 items. And I can't tell you that I saw all of them, but I went through a lot of them. And how I know so much about his childhood was reading about the journals that he wrote about his childhood, which I thought, because he had a happy childhood. His one friend said he was the fact that his mother died in childbirth, it kind of stayed with him. Like maybe he was responsible, of course he wasn't, but other than that, from what he talked about and wrote about in his journals, he just remembered Christmas time with big trees and big celebrations. And he seemed like a pretty happy guy, a happy child. And wasn't, like some artists have these terrible childhood, but it didn't sound to me like he did. Other than, and he apparently had a very good relationship with his stepmother. Again, you have to look at the angles. So here is Munich roofs, and he's looking over. And again, he has, it's an oil. Look at all. I mean, you could almost see this as an abstract painting, as the shapes that make up, and how he balanced the composition of it. With the spire here in kind of reddish, and how he, of course it's so blue, but how he balanced all of the shapes. I mean, when you think about abstraction, you think about shapes and color, and how well the composition is balanced. These are two collagraphs. This is St. Mark's in Venice. Again, see how they did it, the detail. Now this is a straight-on painting, collograph, but it's it still has a lot of, there's a majesty about it. I mean, it's a wonderful, St. Mark's is a wonderful facility. And the colors are kind of interesting too. And he does the flags kind of sweeping. And then this is Montmartre. Again, over the roof lines of Paris to that Montmartre, in Montmartre, that wonderful. And again, when you look up close, there's all these wonderful shapes. So you can connect it with the, you can go back and connect it to some of the abstract work. When you see it over here, again, these shapes are very, very clear there. Even over there, the one on top is a little looser. But you can see how the geometry was a very strong part of his abstraction. And he kept it throughout. Yes?
I have one of the cylinders, but it's very dark. These are all very dark.
Yes.
And so, to me, sailing spinnakers is bright and happy and fun. I look at his paintings, and I don't feel that way when I look at it. And when I look at a lot of this, it's black. I mean,
there are, yes.
There is a, I mean, it sounds like you could uneducatedly say, he was a very happy guy.
Well, I didn't have that impression. I didn't know him that well. But if you look at some of his, have you been in that room yet? Okay, did you see some of the sailboats? Okay, there's a real sense of lightness. The Sassuan Harbor. But he was not a colorist. And that's when I interviewed him and I saw a lot of his work, I wondered about that because personally I'm very attracted to color. That's a real strong, I mean everybody has, when you look at a painting, an artwork, something's going to attract you. It could be color, it could be shape, it could be movement. I know I've done these polls in some of my classes, and the consensus has been color, which is what you're talking about, is what attracts people to a painting. That's not what Donald's doing. Donald is really working with shape. Shape is very much part. And he did say that color isn't important to him, although he loved blue. That was just. So if you get the impression, I don't know, when you look at that, do you find that depressing?
I just, my Donald uses a lot of black. If you look around in here,
Yeah.
a lot of black. It's a lot.
Yeah, a lot of black.
It's not a spiritual, happy, I don't get a happy feeling.
Okay. It's serious. It's serious art. You know what? One of the artists I interviewed was, do you know Robert Motherwell, the artist? I mean, you know his work. And one of his favorite colors was black. And Franz Klein painted his paintings were black. So everybody comes to a painting with a different approach. So you feel like maybe he was kind of depressed or something, but I don't think so, not from what I know about.
The frames are black, and I think that's what's pulling
Oh.
the focus for some. Because if you look at this here in the middle, imagine those with gold frames, and which is they would be
Oh,
very
interesting.
different.
Well, he didn't frame those.
No, he didn't.
No, right?
No, he didn't.
And I think the new approach to framing is to make it as simple as possible. And in some cases, a lot of artists are just doing without frames. But he did not frame those, so maybe if they were gold, as you say, maybe if they were a gold frame, do you think that would have a different approach? Do you think so? If it was a different frame, you think it would? So you think the black kind of emphasizes?
It changes it. I was going to ask you, how do you think framing impacts people's response, because you're seeing quite a
So
lot
here,
of-
when you look at this one,
Yeah,
I mean, this just has just a white
that's like.
frame. And the idea of the frame, in some ways, which is why a lot of artists are not doing anything with framing, when you're working with a watercolor or something on paper under glass, you have to have some kind of frame. And I mean, this one over here has gold frames. Does that lessen your, make them lighter for you? Okay, so, yes.
I had the privilege once of actually looking at one of his color arts. It's extraordinary, because of all the charities. Were you able to collect any of them for this exhibit?
Oh, the color, oh, the plates, the plates, do we have any?
Can you repeat her question so everybody can hear?
Okay, can you maybe stand up and, okay. This lady wants to know about if we have any of the plates that he made the collagraphs for the prints from. We don't.
No.
A lot of the work, his work is now at the Bridgewater Museum at Bridgewater State College. And I would guess that they have plates because Roger, who donated a lot of the work to the museum, had at the end, after Donald died, he basically had all that work. And one of his jobs was to try to place the work in museums or other galleries or whatever, but whatever he didn't do is now at the Bridgewater Museum. I can't imagine there were lots of plates, because in the catalog, Roger writes about what was there. He had 4,000 art, when he died, there were 4,000 artworks in his studio. Now, that would have included prints, and so there could have been 20 of the various holograms or whatever, but there were 4,000 works that he left. And a lot of them, I think, are in Bridgewater. He is showed in a number of museums, but he's not collected in major museums except the MFA.
Yes.
And that's one of my feelings, that he should have been better appreciated. Behind are these, again, they're really abstract for all intents and purposes. The one on the left of the doorway is obviously an airplane, and the one above it looks like an airplane. And then there is a sense of a speeding train. But I think the three on the top and even the one are essentially abstract. So you could see how he kind of moved back and forth. And I don't know the dates of those offhand. I know that they would be on the labels. I don't know the dates of those paintings.
60s, 1960s.
So he was 50s?
60s.
Oh, 60s. So he was pretty much finished with abstraction by the 60s. But so you could see the movement from when he essentially said, "I'm giving it up. I miss the object," he told me. And so there are these airplanes, and it looks like the one above on the right looks like a speeding train. But again, a lot of it is when it's abstract or abstracted, there's a sense that an abstract piece really allows or asks the viewer for their interpretation of it. I mean, so much of art is personal, and as this gentleman said, they're dark for him. And you know, it's interesting because I love color, and I love his work because I see how important it was what he was doing, and how there was this, in terms of art history, how he kind of moved from Bauhaus and Schiller and Demuth and Feininger and kind of grew through that. So I kind of see it, but I understand how you feel because I love color. Yes?
What I get a feeling from is there's a lot of light. I think he's playing with light in terms of, it's not that it's taking you in or out, but they're
Yes.
planes of light. And sometimes they're shooting up, and even in this old version, shooting straight up. Here we are, shooting straight up.
Yeah.
That movement, then there's movement going across. So I think, and there's a lot of movement in that. So
Oh, yes.
It's the movement is like an atmosphere that is not depth, but it is movement.
Yes, and that, a lot of it, as I said before, a lot of it has to do, I mean, if you walk around and look at all the diagonal lines in these paintings, that gives you a sense of the diagonal, it's kind of almost an emotional response. When we look at a landscape and the horizon or beach scene on the horizon, it's very quiet and serene. And then if we see a building, a skyscraper what Sheeler did was he did these industrial buildings and factories, and he would do these, straight lines and angles, and there's a lot of sense of energy from a vertical line. The diagonal line, in my feeling, is the diagonal line, and I think it is maybe almost a universal response, gives you a sense of movement. And I think there is a sense here of what. And you talk, the white is really important here because he talked about, if we think of Picasso's work, his cubism, and the facets of light that he created, and how he created his cubist work. And Picasso, by the way, we always think of him as an abstract artist, but he never, ever departed from an object or a figure. It might look like some of his cubist still lifes, you might think it's totally abstract, but it isn't. He never, ever departed from that. But a lot of it was faceting the images with light. And that's what Donald talked about. Donald talked about, and you could see it here, he talked about the facets of light. And you really, in some ways, it's nice to go back and look at it, but then when you come closer, for example here, which is a beautiful painting, you see he did a little circle of white here. And there are all these geometric shapes. I mean, this is the house, and there are houses behind it. And again, look at all of those diagonals. And it's a house. I mean, it's standing, it's not moving. But you do have a sense of kind of the energy of it. Whereas those two of Provincetown, again, there's a horizon line. It's quieter, it's serene. But when you look at some of these others, it's so different. So it's interesting how he played this. He maybe got tired of, and I don't know this, and we can all put all kinds of things onto an artist's work, but maybe he just wanted to have a quieter piece of art, so that's what he did. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about his method, technical method? I'm looking at some of the oils and watercolors, and the way that the drawings or the painting is constructed almost looks drafted. So, are you familiar with just the way that he put together?
Yes, yes, yes. And you can see it in the video there. There's a video of his watercolors. He would take a small drawing and then decide he's going to do it, say this size. And I don't have an example, but he would take one of these, I mean, look how some of these little, and everybody should come and look at these cases. I mean, these are like 1 by 2 inches or 1.5 by 3 inches. Little, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 little sketches on one page. But he would take something he had seen, and he did take photographs as well, but he would take a sketch, and then he would build, and you can see it on that video, he would build kind of a grid and a section. So he would work from something small, and he would create this grid work to enlarge it so that it was a kind of a replica of what he was trying to do. And you could see that here, but he would, you wouldn't see it, but you'll see it on the video.
So these are, I think these are some of his later works, because these look like they're that early 2000s.
Yes,
So what you described is kind of like a constructive drawing approach with painting over it.
yes. Yes, he would have done, I'm assuming, based on the video of that watercolor, that he translated as a very small image by doing pencil lines and sections and then enlarging it. And so it was very precise. Again, though, and if you look up close, the window has all of these very specific lines and sections of the pane, window panes. And then when arch. And then he has, again, a repetition in the sweep of this train. And then he has these vertical lines, and then these lights, reflections. It's a pretty complex painting. He doesn't usually do people, but he has these people there. It's a very complex painting. And a lot of art is really what pleases us about looking at a painting is its balance. It's what we would like to call its composition, how it works. I had an art teacher once who said, you know, take a great work of art and take something away from it, and the whole painting falls apart. Every piece of this is important. You could see that, and you could see that, and the angles and how he's done it. It is, and I don't want to touch it, but if you took that away, it would be a much lesser painting. It would be. And so his composition was really strong. He was not a colorist, and he admitted that to me, although he loved it.
Does that make it even more interesting that I was wondering the same thing about it, almost looks like a graph?
Yes.
So in a way, it's another reason why it's my favorite, just looking. There's so many things to look at, and one of the things is, this is how it started, but it also worked as window panes. You know, you're
Yes.
working on a lot of different levels. It's very complex.
Yes. Well, yeah, that is. And as I said, that's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I know, me too.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
So some other people, when we look around here, and I had this gentleman's impression, so do we have favorite paintings, or do we really gravitate toward color, so these paintings just don't? Yes.
I was going to say, for me, the things that don't grab, the thing that doesn't grab me is the uniformity of colors, blue, and then its complement of orange.
Yeah.
So many of those things. And what I am attracted to, I do like the compositions and the movement, and that there's lights and darks. But what I'm really attracted to are the bridge paintings, which are so dynamic to me.
The bridges?
The bridges.
Yeah.
And architectural, and also the early ones, which don't have a lot of diagonals, mostly horizontal. But it occurred to me as we were talking that for me what doesn't grab me about this painting is the blue and the orange, the blue and the orange.
Yeah, that was his. And I would really say that he was not a colorist. Yeah, and he pretty much admitted that. Sarah, by the way, is an architect, so you can see why. So you can see why. Yes.
You mentioned a couple times he's not a colorist. What does that mean?
A colorist would be someone who uses color for the emotive aspect of a painting. Okay, so we all respond to color differently, okay. But red, for example, is a sense of excitement. Blue is kind of quiet, okay. Black is, could be depressing, it could be virile, it could be strong. So when an artist is a colorist, and I've interviewed so many of them, Paul Resnick, he was a colorist, I don't know if you know his work, but color was like the most important part of how he constructed a painting. And it was how he balanced the color. It wasn't as much about shape. And his work is representational in a way, it's expressive. But it's really all about color. So if you walked into, say, this gallery, and okay, if you walk around here, there's a painting of mine, in the corner over there. And I'm a colorist, and if you peek in there later on, you'll see what a colorist is. Donald was not a colorist. He was definitely not a colorist. And he used a lot of black. But the white played an important role in a lot of his work, whether it was lots of white space in those paintings back there, or how he faceted light, because he said he was so interested in the light coming through, whatever you call it, the grid work of a bridge, so, or how he brought that light. And the work, I mean, I guess I've been so close to it for so long, and the more you look at it, the more you see in it. But these works are interesting to me, not because of the color, because they're pretty soft, but it's about the shape and the structure and the composition and how he's created. So even though I really am attracted to work of a colorist, which is kind of interesting when I think about it, I hadn't thought about it, because most of the time when I look at art, I'm looking for color. And yet there's something about Donald's work that moves me. Obviously that's why I wanted to do this show. So, yes.
He's an incredible draftsman, first of all.
What?
He's an incredible draftsman.
Yes.
And I think there's a reverence for structure, as you said, that's where that kind of sentimentality comes through. And also the way he places objects, his sense of perspective in space. And then he does get some atmospherics with his treatment of light. So it kind of goes right around the...
Yes. Well, that's what's so interesting, because here it's all about the structure, and then you go into these Provincetown ones, and they are atmospheric. And actually, he said to me, which is so interesting, we talked about his influences, and he talked about Cézanne and Weininger and Schiller and Duluth, and then he mentioned Turner. And I thought to myself, Turner? Because he's all about structure. Don is all about, and Turner, I don't know how many people saw the Turner show at the MFA, but that's all about, particularly his later work was, so atmospheric. But then when you look at that, you see that. You see the atmospheric aspect of his work. So he wasn't just like any artist. He was trying different things. A lot of artists will, in the course of like the 30 years that I've been talking to artists, a lot of artists will say, particularly if they're selling well, I mean, so much about art is marketing, people want to make a living. And they'll say, they want, if they're in a gallery and they sell, the gallery owner will say, well, make more pictures like that, because they're selling. And so the artist is in some way seduced by that. But then there are some artists that say, I get bored, I have to move on. And if it sells, good, and if it doesn't. So artists want to try different things, and one artist told me, Michael Mazur said to me, if you are the same person yesterday than you are today, you haven't grown. And it made him think that, and if you know Michael's work, it changed. He started out as a realist, and he moved into abstraction. So artists don't want to do the same thing all the time. Unless they're really selling, I guess, and some artists are. I had one artist tell me, Sidney Simon, we have some pieces, quite a few, there's some in the other room.
Not anymore.
Oh, not anymore, okay. So he was primarily a sculptor, but Sidney said, and he was a major artist, in, major museum, and he said, but the galleries that he sold wanted him to just always keep doing the same thing because they're selling. And he said he ended up wanting to work, he preferred working with architects because, and he did these big sculptures. There's one on 6th Avenue in New York, I think it's called the Four Seasons, because he had more freedom to kind of do what he wanted to do. He could just didn't want to stay, you know, say. Any other kind of, yes?
To go back to color, when you look at those two right there, and those blue.
And can you, can everybody hear you?
The two that are right there that we're talking about.
Yes.
Those little shots of the red color.
Yes.
You know, first, in the one on the right, you know, your eye is just going right to it. But then here on that first one, you've got the headlights and the traffic lights.
Yes.
And red on the building and the signs.
Right, yeah.
So
And
he's introducing color, but really.
yeah, there's subtle way. Yeah, subtle. And then the holograms are some of them are almost monochromatic. They, you know, there's just really one color in black. Kind of interesting.
Did all the painting come with a tile, or did you have some?
No, they all came. They all came to the museum with the title. And the ones it's funny, the ones we got from Roger, he gave me all the information because we had to do all the captions. And he had the title and the size and the medium and, you know, and all of that. And this is a kind of funny story. Mark there, the last painter from there, he titled it Paris Roofs. So when we put the catalog together, I used his titles because those were the ones, this was his collection, and I assumed he got the titles from Donald. So when we got a color proof from the printer, Benton was looking at the image to check the color, and all the colographs have titles, and the title was Montmartre. Was in Paris Roofs. I don't know, do we ever hear from Roger about it? Whatever.
No.
So the proof came, it was perfect, except the title was wrong. So we had to send it back and we had to change it. But to answer your question, as far as I know, whatever we got from the estate or from Don had titles, right? That came to the museum directly.
And then I'm curious about the title of the top one, which you mentioned as an airplane. And the other time when I came, I didn't pay attention, but what I saw, I think the one at the top, what I saw was actually a graveyard with the facing of the church.
So the one on the top is not the airplane.
So I would be curious if someone could.
What is the title of that name?
That one's Stairway Hollow.
No, the one up there. What is it?
I think she's talking about the top one.
Are you talking about the very top?
Yes.
Oh, the very top.
Yeah, it's called Collins Dome and Stairway.
So it's nothing like
It's like a cathedral, that's.
Right.
No, it is. But it's interesting because I was looking for lively people. Yes. People. And I know maybe you put that there.
Yeah, and there almost looks like a crucifix right there.
Yeah.
So it's almost like it's tricky.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an atmosphere of graveyard.
Yeah.
I have to say, those two paintings, the two works that you refer to as atmospheric, to me, they're static. And I think the stuff on this wall is truly atmospheric with a big dose of energy.
Yes, those don't have the same energy. No, they're just very, again, there's a horizon line. How many horizon lines do we see in his paintings? Not many. So, and again, that horizon line, there are so many artists that paint the Cape, and one of them is Anne Packard, and people might be familiar with Anne's work. And she paints these very quiet, mostly a province town, almost empty beaches, but there's always this horizon horizon line. Sometimes it's low with big sky, sometimes it's high. But then she told me she gets sick of that horizon line after a while. And I think a lot of artists get, you know, they get tired, you know, they've been doing the same thing, they want to do something different. So I hope that when we did this, when we selected the art, and we have a lot more than what's on view, but, you know, someone want to know how we curate the show. So, someone asked me about that. So, we look at the art, what we had in the collection. I looked at art in other collections, like at Bridgewater, and if we had wanted to borrow some paintings, that would have been something we could have done. But when I looked at that, I felt between what we had in the collection and what we got from Roger Dunn, which was like 25, I thought, so a good part of the collection. We felt like we had enough to show the range of Donald's work. We have a lot more abstractions, but because he moved very quickly out of the abstract period, we just picked ones that we felt were representational and were the best. So a lot of you know, artists do wonderful work, and then they do not so good work. Not all of their work is wonderful. So when you're curating a show, first of all, I came up with Building His World because that's what Donald was about. But then I looked at what his, the themes of his work, and came up with the bridges. We had one idea of just doing transportation, but then we decided it just should all be city life. So we came up with the idea of not doing it specifically chronologically, but doing it by theme. And that's how we felt that, although the abstract work is certainly his earliest work. So then you look at what you have, and if major museums can go to the Tate in London, and they could go to the Chicago Art Institute or the Museum at Barrow, but of course we weren't in that position. So we decided that with Roger's collection and with our collection and a few loans, we were able to give a representation of Donald's work. So, and then, when it's all said and done, it's subjective. Art is subjective. And, you know, so if there was another curator working, there could have been a different selection of art. And someone was telling me, Sarah was telling me, she wanted to go to the Whitney Biennial, and then found out someone told you that the work wasn't very good or something. So, and there were two curators, right, on that, whatever, anyway. The other story, which is just in talking about curators, one of the artists that I interviewed, Jim Peters, and we have one of his, at least one of his works. He worked at Provincetown for a while, and now he's up in North Adams. But he, when he was a young man, he had studied at the Fine Arts Work Center, and he was selected one of 9 people, or 9 artists, to be shown at the Guggenheim in a show of new painters. And I interviewed him at the time, and he said, well, there were maybe 1,000 artists that they looked at, and he was one of 9. He said, but you know, it's only one person's opinion. So art really is certainly subjective. And as a curator, you have to get very familiar with the artist's work and know what he's about, and then you select work that's available again. We talked about trying to get the piece from the MFA, but it seemed like, the piece from the MFA reminds me a lot of Third Avenue L. I think it's something about the underground, something
Similar.
about an elevated train.
Yeah.
That he did. Yes?
I think it's worth commenting on his skill as a printmaker. I think if you look at these two right here, and if you look at that one of the train, his ability with the grayer to take a background and to blend that color.
Oh, yes.
It's a hard task. And then to go back and build a colograph on top of that. I mean, it's just an exquisite demonstration of printmaking.
Yes, oh yeah. And there's a whole he did a whole book on how you do a holograph. I mean, that, he really pioneered the holograph as a printmaker. And he had a very large press in his studio.
But I mean, you can see that background, that blend. It's just,
Yes.
It's just incredible.
Yeah, it kind of colors the, yes. And he would have been sending it through the press and working on it numerous times. We had some photographs of various him doing black and white photographs. But we wanted to take the time to look at some of the cases because I thought they were really interesting. The one over there is his designs, which are for the Container Corporation of America. And that gives you a sense of what the Bauhaus was all about, was taking art, fine art, the elements of fine art, and translating it into everyday things. So if you look at these that he created, you get a real sense of design. That case there just gives you a sense of where he exhibited. This little case over here, which is really interesting because that's from the Brewster Davies Library, and it is we only had you'll see some of his notebooks and his writing, and he collected, when he traveled, he collected tickets and pay stubs and theater programs. And I'm going through the items that were at the Brewster Davies Library. I began to have a sense of what his interests were. Besides travel, he loved to travel. But he was very interested in theater. And I'm going to read one, I have it in the catalog. I'm going to read it to you because I was reading it today and I thought it could be it was one of his New Year's resolutions. I'm going to read it to you because it's so good. Yes?
What about his ships? Started with an interest in shipping. He traveled, he cruised a lot.
Right.
A lot of cruises. He made a magnificent painting of Huey.
Yes.
Are there a lot more ships?
Yes, oh yes, because he loved, as I said, his interest in ships goes down to his boyhood when he was at his grandfather's farm. They had shipyards nearby, so he would go there, and so he was a little boy at that time. Got very interested in shipbuilding and ships. He was creating ship models at the time when he was a child. And I think there's a large percentage of his work are ships, yes. And this gives you an example. And if you go in there, but anyway, there's one that's very abstract. But let me just read you, I think it's kind of, this was in the catalog. I went through a lot of his stuff at the Brewster Davies Library. And his notes, I mean, he would talk about dinners and where he went. And this was his 1980 New Year's resolutions. He had written them. I'm losing this. Anyway, I'm going to read this to you. He says, say no more often. Stop trying
I'm sorry. There you go.
Stop trying to please everyone. Stop doing boring things. Hire work done you don't enjoy. Relax. Work on ship models. Matting and framing things for the house. Woodworking. And here's some just things that I think we could all maybe incorporate or some of it. Exercise every day. Meditate every day. Less television. Do more direct drawing and painting. Devote more time to being a good companion. And on the top of the list, which I love, this was, I saved it for the end. He said, let go. If an idea doesn't work after a few tries, stop. Don't be stubborn. Go on to something else. And you could probably see this in his work. If it wasn't working, and these were his 1980 New Year's resolutions. When I read them, I thought, I could learn, I could do this too. So anyway, any more questions? Yes.
Do you know if in growing up, did he ever consider becoming?
I'm sorry?
Did he ever consider becoming an architect?
Not as far as I know, no. He did, no. He said he wanted to do commercial art when he got out of the Institute of Design. And then he got the job at Container Corporation. But obviously, and then in the 50s, he was still a young man, he saw, the MFA bought one of his paintings. It was more of an abstraction. And he sold pretty well in the 50s and the 60s from Lighting Gallery. He had a couple of galleries in Boston. And he did a lot of exhibits all over. He won a number of prizes with the Boston Printmakers and the American Society of Marine Artists, and then in Portland and the Corcoran Gallery. And here's the in this catalog. This is a catalog from 1956 from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. It's their annual report, and there is a photograph of the painting that they have in their collection, and it's called Third. I can't read it, it's real small. But anyway, it's there if someone wants to look at it. And it's actually a lot like that.
Yeah.
It was very similar to that. He showed it at MIT, and he's in those collections. He's in a number of Boston collections at MIT. And you could see why MIT would give him a show. Yeah. So anyway, you might want to peruse these various things. Anybody else? Yes.
I got so excited when you said he loves theater.
It's hard for everybody to hear.
He loves theater, and these two paintings right here, one of the first things I thought of at the end of this, right next to the doorway, they look like set designs.
Oh,
And
yeah.
some of this work does remind me that the dramatic, the drama of the set design is, I think, very evident in some of his work.
He loved the theater, and I only found that out by going through the archives at the Brewster Ladies Library. There were a lot of theater programs that he kept, and then there were clippings that he saved of art of actors, obituaries of actors that he really liked. I mean, some of the British actors. So I kind of got a sense of what his interests were by going through these archives, which is really pretty.
So Deb, I think, so people can purchase a catalog if they want. We might want to,
yes,
because our shopkeeper is still here for only a few more minutes. So we'll stay open for another 15 minutes so for you to enjoy the exhibition. I'll turn the film back on about the watercolors, and if you'd like to purchase a catalog. We're still open for business. So, great.